The sun was just beginning its slow crawl over the jagged horizon, spilling gold and blood red across the dusty plains, when the sound came, a thunder that shook the earth beneath her. She had been riding for hours, the wind biting her cheeks and tugging at her long, dark hair, her heart hammering in her chest, as the wild stallion beneath her lunged forward, more fire than flesh. Every muscle in her body screamed for control, but the horse had other plans. Panic clawed at her throat. She had always trusted her strength, her ability to tame the untamable, but this was different. The ground raced under her hooves, and the cliffs rose sharp and unforgiving on either side. One misstep, and she would plunge into the canyon below. She was going to die. Her name was Leora, a woman of rare courage and spirit, born of the plains but raised among the whispers of survival and solitude. She knew the dangers of riding alone, of venturing beyond the safe reach of the village that lay behind her, yet something inside her wild, unyielding longing had driven her further, chasing freedom, chasing life, chasing a moment that felt stolen from the ordinary. She felt the sweat burn her palms as she gripped the reins, the leather slick and trembling under her fingers. The horse's eyes were wide, veins rippling in the sunlight, nostrils flaring as it raced with a ferocity that made her pulse skip. The world became a blur of dust, rock, and sky, and then, as if summoned by fate itself, a shadow appeared ahead, tall and commanding against the rising sun. He came like a force of nature, not from the village, not from the paths she knew, but from the heart of the wilderness itself. His long hair caught the light like threads of midnight, and the patterns of his tribal jewelry glimmered with a story older than the land. He was an Apache warrior, a man whose presence could silence the wind and command the attention of the earth. His gaze, fierce yet unwavering, locked onto hers. Time seemed to stretch and bend around him. She felt, in that heartbeat, the fragile thread between life and death pull taut. The horse reared, nostrils flaring, hooves scratching the dirt, ready to launch her into a fate she had not chosen. Fear was rising, thick and choking. But then, with a speed and grace that defied the ordinary, the warrior intervened. He stepped into the path of the runaway horse, his movements precise, fluid, born of countless battles with the wild. He did not shout, he did not panic, he simply acted. The horse's momentum met his calm and steady hand, the force of the encounter rippling through the air like a storm held in check. Leora felt the reins tighten in her grip, and then, as if by magic, the stallion slowed, snorted, and finally obeyed. She gasped, her chest heaving with a mix of relief and disbelief. For a moment she could only stare at him. At the man who had saved her life with nothing but sheer presence and courage, there was a magnetic tension in his eyes, a fire that seemed to burn with both danger and promise. He was not just a savior. He was a force of destiny that had appeared at the exact moment she needed him most. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep, steady, carrying the weight of command and calm reassurance. There was no trace of fear, only the sharp clarity of a man who had faced death too many times to tremble before it. I don't think so," she replied, her voice trembling more from adrenaline than injury. She slid off the horse, knees weak, the world still tilting as the dust settled around them. She noticed for the first time the scars etched into his skin, each one a silent story of survival and courage. They were not just marks, they were badges of experience, proof that he had faced the wild and emerged victorious. He nodded, a faint approving gesture that made her chest tighten. "You ride well," he said, almost like an acknowledgement of a challenge met, a respect offered and accepted. But his eyes betrayed another story, one deeper and more complex, hinting at secrets he carried across the endless plains, secrets that had shaped him into the man standing before her. Leora felt a shiver run through her. She had known the landscape, the horses, the rhythm of survival, but nothing had prepared her for the presence of this man. There was something forbidden about the pull she felt, something that whispered of love, danger, and choices that could not be easily undone. She had been taught caution, to follow the rules, to live within the boundaries set by a world she could control, but he was a reminder that life often existed outside those boundaries. For a moment, neither spoke, letting the silence stretch between them like a bridge. Around them, the plains breathed with life, the distant caw of a crow, the wind rustling through the tall grasses, the faint shimmer of a river winding its way through the valley. Yet amid this tranquility, the tension remained unresolved, a promise that the story was far from over. Then, without warning, a sound broke the stillness, a bark, sharp and insistent, coming from the ridge above. Leora turned, heart skipping, to see movement, shadows shifting in ways that did not belong. Her pulse quickened again, the adrenaline of danger surging through her veins. The warrior's stance shifted, protective, his eyes narrowing toward the threat she could not yet see. "Stay close," he said, his tone firm but gentle, as though warning and comfort could coexist in the same breath. He moved beside her, not too close, not too distant, a presence that promised safety without demanding submission. Leora found herself holding her breath, aware of the rhythm of his movement, the weight of his gaze, the undeniable connection that sparked between them. The world had changed in the span of moments. What had begun as a ride across familiar plains had become something else entirely, a collision with fate, a brush with death, and the sudden, shocking realization that life could turn on a single heartbeat. Leora knew that this encounter would haunt her thoughts long after the sun had risen fully.
Long after the dust had settled.
Long after the horse had calmed and the danger had passed.
Oh.
She sensed it in the way he moved, in the quiet strength of his presence, in the way the world seemed to tilt slightly toward him. And yet amid relief, a flicker of fear lingered. Plains held secrets, some whispered, some hidden in shadow. She had glimpsed only the edge of what was possible, and even now, as the warrior's eyes searched hers with unspoken questions, she understood that nothing would be simple again. She was alive, but survival was just the beginning. Something forbidden, something dangerous, had begun to bloom an ember that neither time nor caution could easily extinguish. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the faint scent of wild sage, as if the land itself was whispering warnings she could not yet comprehend. The horse stamped its hooves nervously, ears twitching, as though aware that the moment had shifted from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Leora's heart raced, a mix of awe, fear, and a budding, unnameable longing that made her stomach twist and her chest ache. She did not know his name, she did not know his story, yet she felt tethered to him in a way that defied reason. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the plains, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The encounter had ended one chapter of danger, but another had begun, one filled with questions she could not yet answer, desires she had not yet acknowledged, and a love that might prove as wild and untamable as the plains themselves. Leora knew, deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be the same. And then, as if to underline the truth of her realization, the sound came again, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling from the trees, carrying with it a sense of looming consequence. The warrior's hand instinctively moved to the bough at his back, his eyes scanning the horizon with a precision that spoke of years of survival and instinct. Leora's grip on the reins tightened, not for the horse, but for herself, bracing against the unknown that was coming. She had survived the immediate danger. The horse was calm, but life, it seemed, had only just begun to test her. And standing beside her, silent but potent, was the man who had stopped death itself, a warrior of the Apache, a stranger whose very presence threatened to rewrite the rules of her world. Leora realized with a jolt that this was the moment where her old life ended, and the dangerous, thrilling, forbidden path of the heart began. The rustling in the trees faded into the wind, but Leora's heart did not calm. She felt the weight of the plains pressing down around her, vast and indifferent, as if the earth itself were holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. She glanced at the warrior, whose dark eyes never left the horizon, alert to every movement, every whisper of danger. He was quiet, but his presence spoke louder than any words. There was a story behind those eyes, a history written in shadows and battles that had left him both feared and revered. "My name is Tokata," he said at last, his voice low, carrying the kind of authority that could command silence even in the midst of a storm. "You should not have been out here alone." Leora swallowed, trying to steady the tremor in her voice. I didn't think the trail would lead to danger." Her words sounded hollow even to her, because she knew she had been reckless, driven by a yearning she could barely name. She had always wanted freedom, but freedom had a cost she had not fully understood until now. Takota's gaze softened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "The plains are not forgiving," he said. "They take quickly what is given without caution." His words were simple, but in them lay a weight of experience that made her feel both small and alive. She realized that this man had survived things she could scarcely imagine, and yet he carried himself with a calm that defied the chaos around them. Leora tried to find her composure, brushing the dust from her riding cloak. "Why? Why did you help me?" she asked, curiosity mingled with a faint thrill of something unspoken. He looked at her then, really looked, and there was a flicker of something in his expression, a shadow of a smile, a hint of recognition. "'Cause I could not watch you fall," he said simply. His words carried no embellishment, but they struck her deeply, as if the plains themselves had chosen to protect her through him. The silence returned, but it was different now, heavier with questions. Leora wanted to ask him everything, the story behind the scars, the battles he had fought, the tribe he had come from, but something held her back. There was a mystery in his restraint, a power in the things he did not say. She had always been drawn to the unknown, yet now it made her pulse quicken in ways she had not expected. Takoda moved toward a cluster of boulders, gesturing for her to follow. "We should find shelter," he said. "The plains hide more than just wild animals." As they walked, the wind carried faint echoes of a distant drum beat, a rhythm that seemed almost like a warning. Leora's mind raced. She had heard stories from travelers and traders, whispers of conflicts between settlers and the Apache, tales of raids and alliances, of trust broken and vengeance taken. She wondered how much of those stories were true, how much had been shaped by fear and imagination. And she wondered where Takoda fit into that world. Was he an enemy to some, a protector to others, or simply a man who lived by his own code, shaped by a past that demanded solitude and silence? They reached a small hollow shaded by twisted pines and rocky outcrops. Takoda knelt, checking the ground and the surroundings with the precision of someone who knew every inch of the land. Leora followed his lead, lowering herself onto a flat stone and letting the adrenaline drain from her limbs. She was still trembling, not only from the ride, but from the undeniable tension that seemed to cling to the air between them. "You are far from your village," Takoda observed, more a statement than a question. Leora hesitated. "I needed to see the plains. I needed to feel alive." The words escaped her before she could stop them. She realized they carried more truth than she had intended to admit. She had been running toward freedom, but she had also been running toward something she could not yet name. Takoda nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The land gives life, but it also tests it. You have strength, but strength alone is not enough." His tone was calm, almost fatherly, but there was an edge to it that reminded her that danger had not passed. The plains were still wild, still unpredictable, and she was still a part of that chaos. Leora's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley. She saw movement in the distance, figures she could not yet identify, riders or travelers crossing the plains with purpose. Her pulse quickened. The world was larger than she had imagined, and the safety she had felt in the shadow of Takoda's presence was fragile. "What are you hiding?" she asked suddenly, unable to contain her curiosity. "You move like someone who belongs to this land, but not like someone who has nothing to fear. Who are you really?" Takoda's eyes darkened, thoughtful. "I am a guardian," he said finally, though his tone carried more weight than the word itself suggested. "Some call me protector, some call me enemy. But I answer to the plains and to the people I am sworn to defend." Leora's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of his words. Sensing the depth of his duty, the layers of history that bound him to this land, she felt both awe and caution, realizing that she was treading into a world far more complex than the simple life she had known in her village. There was honor here, but also danger, loyalty, but also conflict. And somewhere within that balance, a connection had formed between them, a bond forged in adrenaline and life or death decisions, fragile yet undeniable. The wind shifted again, carrying scents she did not recognize. And a distant sound, the faint crack of hooves on stone, reached her ears. Leora tensed, instinctively gripping the folds of her cloak. Takoda's hand moved to the small knife at his belt, his gaze scanning the horizon with a predator's focus. The threat was near, or it might be, and yet they did not move. They waited, two figures bound by circumstance, by fate, by a brush with death that had left more questions than answers. Leora realized then that she could not turn back. Whatever the plains had in store, whatever secrets Dakota carried, whatever dangers lurked in the shadows, she was now a part of it. Her life had been saved, but the story of her survival was only beginning. And as the figures on the horizon drew closer, the sense of mystery deepened, the tension thickened, and the world seemed poised on the edge of a revelation she could not yet grasp. The plains whispered around them, indifferent and eternal. The sun climbed higher, the dust swirled in lazy eddies, and the wild rhythm of life pulsed beneath their feet. Leora glanced at Tokoda, and for a moment their eyes met in understanding and unspoken questions. The day had started with fear and salvation, and it would end with more uncertainty, more challenges, and a bond neither of them fully understood. The forbidden path ahead was dangerous, and yet in its danger there was a promise that neither could ignore. The distant riders grew closer, their shapes more defined against the rising sun. Leora squinted, her chest tightening with unease. She recognized no uniforms, no flags, just men on horseback, moving with purpose across the endless plains. She turned to Tokoda, whose expression had hardened, eyes narrowing as he studied the approaching figures. The air between them thickened with tension, every rustle of grass and snap of twig amplified in the quiet of the hollow. "They are not travelers," he said, voice low, a warning in every syllable. "Watch the horizon carefully. Do not make sudden movements." Leora obeyed instinctively, crouching beside a boulder, though her heart beat so loudly it felt like a drum in her chest. She had faced danger before, but never with someone who exuded such unshakable control. Someone whose presence alone demanded respect and caution. As the riders drew nearer, Leora caught glimpses of their faces' hard eyes, weathered and sharp. With the look of men who had spent too many nights surviving the cold and the lawless stretches beyond the village, their leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, dismounted and signaled the others to fan out, their movements deliberate, almost predatory. Leora's stomach knotted. Something told her these men were searching for more than just passersby. Tokoda stepped forward, his movements fluid and silent. "They are scouts," he muttered, almost to himself, his gaze locked on the approaching danger. "They are looking for something. Or someone." He reached for a pouch at his belt, pulling out a small bundle of herbs and incense. He began to crush them slowly, the scent rising into the air, subtle but purposeful. Leora watched, confused and curious, as he murmured words she could not understand. The smoke drifted toward the scouts, and their horses became uneasy, nostrils flaring. "They can sense you," Tokoda said quietly, almost as if reading her thoughts. "This land has eyes, even when humans do not. We must move before they discover us." Leora's mind raced. "Are they? What do they want?" Tokoda's eyes flicked to her, sharp and assessing. Some seek gold, some seek vengeance, some seek power. These men, they seek control. They are not here for survival, they are here for conquest. His words sent a shiver down her spine. The plains, which had seemed vast and empty moments before, now felt like a web of danger stretching in every direction. She thought of her village, small and distant behind the ridges, and wondered if these men were connected to the traders she had seen passing through the market weeks ago, the ones whose smiles did not reach their eyes, whose hands lingered too long on the goods and the maps. Could this threat stretch back to the place she had called home? Thought made her stomach twist with fear and guilt. She had ventured alone into the unknown, and now the danger might follow her there. Tokoda shifted slightly, signaling her to move toward a narrow path leading deeper into the pine-covered hills. "We cannot face them here," he said. "This hollow will trap us. Follow me and keep quiet." Leora obeyed, the rhythm of her steps trying to match his calm yet urgent pace. She noticed the way he navigated the uneven ground, a natural mastery that came from a lifetime of living in harmony with the land, and she felt both awe and frustration. How could one man hold such power and yet remain so mysterious? As they moved, Tokoda began to speak, his voice low and steady. "You need to understand the balance of these plains. Every action has consequence. The people who walk here must respect the land, or it will teach them lessons they cannot survive." Leora tried to absorb his words, but her mind kept returning to the riders, to the fear she had felt when the horse reared, and to the unspoken tension that seemed to bind her to Tokoda in ways she did not fully understand. Why? Help me." She asked again, more insistently this time. "I'm just a stranger to you, and yet you risk everything." Tokuda did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward a ridge, where the shadow of the scouts had momentarily paused, scanning the valley below. Then he turned back to her, because some connections cannot be ignored. Some moments demand action, even if they defy reason or law. You were in my path for a reason. Whether that path will save or destroy you is not yet known." Leora's pulse quickened. His words hinted at a destiny she had never imagined, a thread tying her life to this man and to the wild land that stretched endlessly around them. She realized that survival was no longer the only thing at stake. There were forces at play she could not yet comprehend, powerful, dangerous, and entirely unpredictable. The path narrowed further, and they climbed higher into the rocky hills. Below, the scouts began to move again, spreading out, searching. Leora could feel the tension building, the sense that danger was closing in from every direction. And yet, beside her, Tokuda remained composed, a quiet anchor in the chaos. She longed to ask him more, to understand his past, the secrets carried in his eyes, but she sensed that the timing was not right. Now, survival came first. As they rounded a bend, they came to a small plateau overlooking the valley. Tokuda paused, scanning the area with meticulous care. "We are not safe yet," he said. "They will not give up easily. They seek something only I can guard. And now, perhaps, something you carry as well." Leora's stomach tightened. Something she did not fully understand was at stake, something connected to her presence here, to her decision to ride alone across the plains, and to the mysterious bond forming between her and this warrior. She wanted to turn back, to retreat to the comfort of her village, yet she knew instinctively that the moment had passed. Whatever lay ahead would demand courage, cunning, and the willingness to step into the unknown. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of smoke. Perhaps from a distant fire, perhaps from the scouts themselves. Leora realized with a jolt that she had no choice but to trust Tokuda, to follow him deeper into the hills, and to face the threats that seemed to gather around them like a storm on the horizon. The plains were alive with danger, alive with mystery, and alive with possibilities she could not yet name. And as the shadow of the scouts moved closer, as the sun climbed higher, casting stark light across the valley, Leora understood that the story of her survival was no longer simple. She had been saved once, but the challenge ahead would test everything: her courage, her loyalty, and the unexpected forbidden connection that had begun to take root between her and Tokuda. The plains whispered of danger, and of love that might not be allowed, but neither the land nor the heart could be denied. The wind carried a sharp scent of dust and tension as Leora and Tokuda crested the final ridge, the valley below stretching wide and unforgiving. The scouts had not given up. Movements were deliberate, relentless, like wolves circling a hidden prey. Every rustle of grass, every clatter of distant hooves made Leora's heart jump. She gripped the folds of her cloak, wishing she could vanish into the shadows, yet she knew there was no escape except forward, with Tokuda at her side. He moved with a quiet certainty that both reassured and unnerved her. Every step he took was measured, every glance calculated. Leora tried to match his rhythm, yet she felt clumsy, untrained, a mere shadow beside him. And still, she trusted him. She had no choice. The bond that had begun in desperation now pulsed with unspoken understanding, each glance and gesture carrying weight beyond words. Below them, the scouts had fanned out, scanning the hills and ridges with practiced vigilance. One of them raised a hand and pointed toward the ridge, a signal that made Tokuda tense. He crouched beside Leora, whispering, "They see more than they should. We must move, and we must do it carefully. One wrong step, and they will descend like fire." Leora nodded, heart hammering, her mind racing through the stories she had heard of Apache warriors and settlers, of conflict and loyalty, of danger lurking in every shadow. But she also realized that these stories, these warnings, did not prepare her for the pulse of fear and thrill that came from being alive in the moment. Facing the edge of peril with a man whose courage seemed boundless, they began to descend the ridge, keeping to the shadowed paths that twisted through the rocky terrain. Leora noticed how Tokuda's eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, his hands ready to draw a weapon or bow at a moment's notice. She felt the rhythm of his alertness, the strength of his presence, and for the first time, she understood what it meant to truly depend on someone else for survival. Suddenly, a shout echoed from below, sharp and commanding. One of the scouts had spotted movement, and now the valley erupted in activity. Horses stamped, hooves pounding against stone, and the air filled with shouts that carried over the wind. Leora froze, gripping Takeda's arm. He did not speak, only pressed her lower into the shadows, his body shielding hers instinctively. Her pulse raced. She had never felt more exposed, more alive, more aware of every sound, every movement. "They will try to cut us off," Takedo whispered, his eyes blazing with intensity. "We cannot outrun them. We must outsmart them." Leora swallowed hard. She wanted to ask how, wanted to demand some reassurance, but she trusted him to know the path. Every instinct screamed danger, yet the bond between them was stronger than fear. She felt the surge of adrenaline mixed with something else, something forbidden, something she had not dared to name. Her pulse quickened at the thought of being so close to him, his strength and presence shielding her from the storm of pursuers. As they moved deeper into a narrow ravine, Takedo suddenly halted, pressing a finger to his lips. Leora crouched beside him, straining to hear. Below, the scouts had split into two groups, attempting to flank them, their movements coordinated yet reckless. Underestimating the terrain they had entered, Takeda's eyes flicked to her, sharp and knowing. "This is the moment," he said softly. "We must act together." She nodded, her nerves taut. Every step now carried the weight of possibility and consequence. They moved with careful precision, slipping behind boulders and shadows, each breath calculated, each heartbeat measured. Leora felt the closeness of Takeda beside her, the warmth of his body. The unspoken reassurance that he was more than a protector, he was a force she could lean on, if only for the moment. Suddenly, a scout rounded the bend ahead, horse straining under speed. Takeda moved first, a blur of motion, knocking the man from his horse with a single fluid movement that left Leora breathless. But there was no time to linger. More figures appeared, closing in from the ridge above. Leora's mind spun. She had faced danger before, but now it was everywhere, pressing in from all sides. And the weight of survival pressed down heavier than ever. Takeda grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a hidden path, one that led through a narrow crevice in the rocks. "This way," he urged. The path was treacherous, uneven, and lined with jagged stones, but it offered cover. Leora stumbled, nearly losing her footing, and he caught her instantly. The strength of his arms a tether between life and fall. The touch sent a shiver through her, a rush of something forbidden and dangerous, a connection that neither could ignore. They slipped through the rocks, moving as silently as the shadows themselves. Leora's chest ached with exertion, her heart hammering with fear and exhilaration. She realized that the scouts had underestimated them, that the land itself seemed to bend in their favor when guided by Takeda's knowledge and skill, yet the danger was far from over. Every sound, every movement could betray them, and she could sense the scouts' determination, the inevitability of confrontation, lurking just beyond each bend. As they paused to catch their breath, Takeda pressed his hand to her shoulder, steadying her. "We have a moment," he said quietly, his gaze piercing hers. "But we cannot linger. They will not stop until they find what they seek. Stay close, trust your instincts, and remember, courage alone will not be enough." Leora nodded, the words sinking deep into her bones. She had survived the runaway horse, she had survived the plains, but now the true test had begun. And yet, in the midst of the fear, she felt it the pull toward Takeda, the forbidden bond that had grown in silence, in shared peril. She realized that whatever awaited them, whatever dangers lay ahead, she was no longer alone, and that bond, fragile yet undeniable, might be the only thing strong enough to guide them through the storm. The wind howled through the ravine, carrying dust and the distant sound of the scouts' approach. Leora felt her pulse tighten, the world shrinking to the narrow path ahead, the shadows around them, and the presence of the man who had saved her life and now walked beside her. A living promise of protection, strength, and a love that dared not yet speak its name. The tension was unbearable, the danger immediate, and yet every nerve in her body thrummed with anticipation. She knew the moment of reckoning was near, the climax of fear and courage approaching. and the choices they would make in the next heartbeats could change everything life. Freedom and the forbidden connection growing between them. The scouts' shouts echoed faintly behind the ridges, but the narrow ravine had worked in their favor. Tokuda led Leora through a hidden path that opened onto a small clearing, the sunlight breaking through the trees in scattered beams. The air smelled of pine and earth, alive and grounding. Leora's chest heaved, her body trembling from fear and relief. She turned to Takoda, seeing for the first time not just a warrior, but a man who carried the weight of honor, courage, and a life shaped by the wild plains. "They won't follow us here," Tokuda said, scanning the surrounding hills one last time. "The terrain is too rough. They'll be forced to regroup, and we gain the advantage." Leora let out a long breath she hadn't realized she had been holding, relief washing over her in waves. For the first time since the runaway horse, she felt the tension loosen slightly, though she knew the danger of the plains was never truly gone. She looked around, taking in the quiet beauty of the clearing, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant curve of the river reflecting sunlight, the way the wind carried the scent of the wild. I can't believe we made it," she said softly, her voice trembling. I thought I was going to die." Takoda's gaze softened. "You are alive," he said, his voice steady but warm, "and you are stronger than you know. The plains have tested you, and you endured. That is worth more than any victory of the scouts." Leora's eyes met his, and in that moment, she saw not just a protector, but someone who had come to mean something more than she could have imagined. The fear and adrenaline had forged a connection that neither could deny. Her heart, still racing, found a strange peace in his presence, a promise that survival alone had brought her to something greater. As they rested, Tokuda shared more of his story. He spoke of the Apache people, of his role as a guardian of the land, and of the responsibilities that had shaped him. Leora listened, captivated by his words and the strength of his convictions. She realized that the warrior who had saved her life was not just bound to the land, but bound by loyalty, honor, and a code she had never fully understood. And yet in those stories she also found space for herself, her courage, her curiosity, her willingness to step into the unknown. Hours passed, the sun climbing high, and then beginning its slow descent. The scouts had not returned, and the valley lay quiet once more, the threat fading like the shadows of the late afternoon. Leora finally allowed herself to breathe fully, feeling the weight of fear lift and the quiet thrill of survival settle into something warmer. She looked at Takoda and noticed, for the first time, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips, a softness in the eyes that had been so fierce just hours before. "You saved me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, more than once. He shook his head. "I did what needed to be done. You saved yourself, too." Courage is not measured by the absence of fear, but by what you do despite it. His hand brushed against hers briefly, a fleeting touch that carried more meaning than words could express. Leora felt the connection deepening, a quiet understanding that their lives, though different, had become intertwined in ways neither could ignore. As the evening light softened the landscape, Leora and Takoda began the journey back toward her village. The plains were still vast and dangerous, but they moved together now with purpose and confidence. Along the way, they shared stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. Leora felt a sense of belonging she had never known the bond with Tokuda. With the land, and with her own courage, creating a harmony that resonated deeply within her. When they finally reached the outskirts of her village, the familiar sights felt both comforting and new. Leora's neighbors had noticed her absence and were waiting with worry etched into their faces. She dismounted, her legs trembling slightly, and Tokuda stayed close, protective yet respectful. She knew that introducing him to the village would be complicated an Apache warrior. A stranger, a man bound by his own code, but she also knew that the connection they had formed could not be denied. Takoda knelt, offering a respectful greeting to the elders, his posture humble but proud. Leora explained briefly, her voice steady now, the story of the runaway horse, the scouts, and how Takoda had saved her life. There were questions, of course, cautious glances, and whispered discussions, but the elders could not deny the truth in her eyes, nor the quiet strength of the man standing beside her. As night fell, Leora and Takoda stood together on a hill overlooking the village. The stars began to shine, reflected in the river below, and the plains stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. She leaned slightly into him, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his presence, the promise of safety and connection. "You are more than I could have imagined," she said softly. "And you are stronger than I first believed," he replied. Their hands met, fingers entwining naturally, a gesture of trust and newfound closeness. In that quiet moment, the trials of the day, the fear, the danger, and the forbidden sparks between them all seemed to settle into a sense of balance. The plains whispered around them, alive with wind and shadows, but now they carried not just threat, but possibility. Leora understood that life would continue to test them, that challenges would arise. But for now, she had survived, learned, and discovered a love that was both thrilling and profound. And as the night deepened, she felt a peace she had never known before, harmony between courage and survival, fear and hope, danger and the quiet power of love. The Apache warrior who had stopped a runaway horse, who had saved her life, and who had become her ally, protector, and more, stood beside her. Together, they watched the stars, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they had found something rare, something enduring, and something worth every risk the plains had demanded. The world was wide, the journey ongoing, but in that moment, Leora felt alive in a way she had never imagined. And beside her, Takada's steady presence reminded her that the most extraordinary stories often begin with danger, yet end with hope, courage, and a love that could survive even the wildest of plains.